good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today, we're mastering sales through teaching techniques, a topic near and dear to my heart too. I'm joined by Ariel Hopper. Ari is the head of sales at Innerlogic, an organization focused on empowering HR departments to better drive cultural transformation. With a decade-long track record in leading high-impact sales teams and pioneering initiatives across multiple tech sectors, his expertise reflects a deep integration of educational principles in practical sales environments. Ari, welcome.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation today, and thanks for the great introduction. I might have to steal that.
Absolutely. It's all yours. So, Ari, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey into sales, and where you are today?
Yeah, certainly. So it's been a little bit of a roundabout journey for me, I would say. As you mentioned, I'm head of sales at Innerlogic today, but I've only been there for about a month or so. Prior to that, I've been in a variety of commercial roles, mostly at software startups and scale-ups over the past sort of 10, 11 years or so, doing everything from being a new business account executive to existing business to leading a channel sales team, and a little bit of everything in between. I've spent the past 5 years or so working in the artificial intelligence space, selling directly to some of the largest brands in the world, which has been a very exciting experience. And obviously AI is everywhere these days. Maybe we'll get into that later, but a very fast developing space. But prior to all of that, I had a previous career for a few years teaching, which took me around the world to a variety of countries, like Japan, Australia, the UK, where I'm from, Canada, where I currently live, and teaching in a variety of types of schools and eventually university. It was a lifetime ago, but quite a formative experience. And maybe like yourself, that's where I'll end up again at some point.
I always said it was going to be my retirement job. Little did I know that I'm able to do both simultaneously, and I love it. So let's jump right into it. What are some teaching strategies that can be applied to improve sales performance?
It's a big question. So I think, I'll caveat it with this, that this is my own experience. This is something that I've gone through, and I've taken these learnings and sort of applied them to sales. But ultimately, I think anyone can take lessons from, whether it be a previous career or anything else that they do in their lives, hobbies, whatever it might be, right? Because sales is it's a person-to-person job. So there's lots of things that you do in your life that you can apply to that. So this is relevant to me, and hopefully it's valuable to others. But it is from that perspective of that's my previous career. But I mean, to answer the question, I guess ultimately, with teaching, your aim is to take students from not knowing something to knowing something. It's kind of like a knowledge transfer, I guess. And that's great. That's kind of the first level, I guess, right? It's not necessarily the most inspiring knowledge transfer, but it is what it is. But ultimately, I think the goal in teaching is to help students achieve their ultimate goals, right? You're just part of their journey towards their ultimate goal, whatever that might be, right? Why are they studying? They need a particular job, or they need to get into a university program, or whatever it might be, right? There's hundreds of different goals that they might have. And you're just a part of that, but you're a key part of helping them, achieve those goals. So I think it's always taking that perspective first off and saying, what do they want to achieve? How can you help them achieve that? And I think in sales, it's very similar, right? You are transferring knowledge. So you're transferring knowledge typically about your solution to them, but it could also be about trends in the industry. It could be about case studies. could be about all sorts of things. But ultimately, you're transferring knowledge. But the level above that then is you need to transfer value as well. So, ultimately they have a goal. They don't want to just buy your software, for example, because it's cool or whatever it might be, right? Nobody wants to just buy software. They want to buy it because it helps them achieve their goal or gets them closer to achieving their goal. So I think that's kind of the overarching connection for me is whether you're a teacher or you're in sales, you're trying to help them, achieve their goals. And that's kind of what really is probably the most satisfying part of both of those roles for me, was helping those students, achieve their goals, see them achieve their goals, and see what sort of, joy that gives them. And that's very transferable to sales as well. So that's kind of the high level. But I could also dig into, the individual components as well of sales and some of the lessons there. But any thoughts or questions on that?
Well, first of all, I loved what you said at the onset, which was you're helping them achieve their goals. That's definitely the teacher mindset, putting the student first. As we were talking a little bit before coming on the air, we were saying this is a relatively new approach for sales. It never really was that way, but it seems to be now. It's interesting that the Sales 2.0 approach becomes more customer centric, just as teaching becomes more or has been student centric. Mm-hmm. So, with that in mind, what are some of the things, the techniques that you applied in teaching, presenting, even giving tests or so on, that seem to translate to that buyer first approach in sales?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's if we walk maybe through look at the sales steps. I'm not going to start with prospecting because that would maybe be shoehorning in some connections there. But maybe if we start with something as simple as rapport building, right? So it's kind of sales 101 is rapport building, right? Making sure that you have that connection. But ultimately, why do you have that? Why do you need that connection with that individual, that prospect, or that group of people? It's not just so they like you. Yes, that maybe be an element of it, but they don't ultimately have to necessarily like you to purchase your product or solution. But in my opinion, it helps them open up. It helps them be honest or more open with their opinions or their questions. If I went into a classroom and I didn't build any rapport with my students, and then I need to ask them questions, I'm not really going to get any answers. It's going to be very silent, very quiet, and that's not going to help anyone. That's not going to help them learn at all. And it's not going to help me understand how much they know or don't know. And it's kind of the same in sales, right? In a qualification call, you need them to open up as much as possible so that they will tell you as much as they feel comfortable telling you, so that you can really get to the pains, the problem, because otherwise you're never going to know, whether you have a solution for them or not. So I think, it can start with rapport building. That's definitely one element. One method we used, I don't know if it's still something that's used today in teaching, but pretty simple method was task, teach, task, which is, or test, teach, test is another way of putting it, which is essentially a way of learning how much the student knows, right? So you set them a task. From that task, you're able to identify how much they know about a particular topic. Then you identify those gaps and you teach them. And you teach them what they don't know. Then you set them another task so that they can, test themselves, and you can understand how much they've learned and if there are still gaps. And then you just keep going with that cycle until, they know the subject. And I think that's something you can apply to sales as well, right? Is particularly, in the qualification process. You don't want to just show up and throw a bunch of information at those, prospects. This is our cool product. This is what it does. These are all the features, because you don't know what they're interested in. They might not even be interested in your product. So you've really got to identify what they know, what they don't know, and help fill in the gaps for them. So I think that sort of task, teach, task method is quite useful in helping understand them. And connected to that, maybe another one is during the qualification process, I think quite a common thing for people to fall back on, certainly when you're starting out in sales, is not pushing quite far enough, quite deep enough to get to the actual sort of pain. And one of the things that's one of the common mistakes, and to be honest, I still do it today sometimes as well by mistake, is does that make sense? Is a common question after you've presented something. Does that make sense? I don't think it's a bad question on its own, but ultimately you're just asking for a yes or no answer, which isn't going to help you actually uncover more knowledge. So I think it's and it's the same in teaching. If I just said, "Do you understand what I said?" they're all going to say, "Yeah, sure," because nobody wants to raise their hand. No one wants to be the person that doesn't know the information you just told them. So it's how do you ask better questions to uncover more conversation, more knowledge, more understanding about that prospect? Ask open questions, questions that what are your thoughts on that? Maybe what questions do you have about that? Instead of those sort of yes no questions. So those are a couple of things. Presentations is a whole next question, I guess, but I'll pause for a minute.
I just wanted to bring in a comment from the audience. Bob Britton joins us again. Hello, Bob.
Hi,
Thanks
Bob.
for joining us. And he says, I see facilitation rather than teaching as being the motion of good sales. Customers don't need more information. They need to make sense of the information they have. Selling is almost like counseling in that way rather than teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it depends what your definition of, teaching is, right? I mean, everyone probably has a different sense of what teaching is based on their experiences with it. Some people might have an experience which is really just going into a classroom and a teacher telling them information for an hour and then off they go. And some people might like that. That might be good for them. I don't really see teaching as that. I see it more as a two-way conversation and trying to understand what people know and what people don't know, and helping them to get to that place of knowledge. So I always think back to what are my favorite teachers? When I was a teacher, I thought back and what kind of teacher do I want to be? And I thought about my favorite teachers back at school at the time, and those were always ones which were passionate about their subject. They loved it. They always had time for their students. They didn't make assumptions, and they also pushed you. They pushed you a little bit further. And I don't think you can push your students further if you're just throwing information at them. I think you can only really push them further when you understand where they are and where they can go. And I think that's kind of in sales as well. Sometimes on sales calls, people are naturally a little bit reluctant to give up, information or be as open as you would like them to be, which is, understandable in some ways. But it's kind of your job to dig into that and help push them towards, what is the right solution for them. And if you know your subject better than anybody else, then, you should know whether it is the right solution for them.
We were talking about the sales process and how teaching applies to various bits of that. I'm going to skip forward. I want to know your thoughts on what the world of teaching can tell us about managing objections.
Well, I think objections is it kind of comes back to that knowledge gap, right? It's what are objections ultimately? It's really a lack of knowledge, and that could be because either you haven't explained things well enough as a salesperson, and it's a communication issue. You haven't communicated in the way that helps the prospect understand what it is, or perhaps you've gone in the wrong direction, which is telling in itself, because it's saying, well, actually, that's not important to them. The avenue you've gone down is actually not important to them. You need to bring it back and take it down that road that is actually important to them. And sometimes that's easy to do when you're in a sales conversation, which is, flowing in lots of different directions. So I think it comes to preparation for objections, right? Like, how do you prepare for those sales conversations, and who are you meeting? What's important to them? So how much do you prepare for that particular audience? I wouldn't walk into a classroom and just wing it. If you do, it's probably not going to 9 out of 10 times, probably 10 out of 10 times, probably not going to work. And I realize in sales, you don't always have that, ability to prepare in the same way. But I think the more preparation you can do as to what's important for your particular audience, putting yourself in their shoes, what do they want? What are their goals? And you will have those objections come up in your thinking. You don't want those objections to be coming up live on the call. You want those to be as minimized as possible. So preparation helps prevent that.
Absolutely. Let's switch gears a little bit, but not too much. What can you learn, or rather, what teaching concepts can be applied to sales leadership?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't really see myself necessarily as a leader, but I have worked with many leaders of varying capabilities and experience, and I think ultimately, if you're in a leadership position, you should be taking those comes back to those best teachers, right? Those teachers you had. From a teacher perspective, I wanted to take on board the best teachers I had and try to in some way replicate that the best I could. And I think it's the same in a leadership position. Is who were those leaders that you've had that really helped you, that really appealed to you, that you feel that you really want others to experience. And I think that's kind of my advice would be, take on those and look at those, and that's kind of how you would frame your leadership. But at the same time, don't ignore also those teachers that weren't so useful for you on the surface, right? They may have something that either you don't want to be like that, or that you want to take away that maybe there were a couple of elements they were good at. So I think ultimately it comes back to that thing, right? Like, you want to make time for your students. If those are your team, make time for them. Push them further than maybe they think they can go, but support them when they can't. I think if you think about teaching, you often have a large classroom of could be 30 people, and you think about the different levels in there. Some are really high up, really excel, and then others may struggle, but they've all got to move together in the same direction and achieve essentially the same thing. So you need to spend time with those that need the help. You need to guide them, and you also need those that are stronger to step in and help those that maybe are struggling a little bit. And I think that applies to both your team, but also to sales, when maybe in an enterprise sales a little bit more, but when you have a multi-threading environment where you're talking to many people at one organization, you need them all to be moving in the same direction, but they're all got different priorities, different interests, different things going on in their lives. So I think it's just about putting yourself in their perspective, putting yourself in their day-to-day, preparing and making sure that you've got value to add for each of those individuals along the way. That's my thoughts. What do you think?
Well, I didn't hear anything there that I would have disagreed with. Wanted to dig in a little bit more, though. Along those same lines, what can we learn about feedback in teaching that can be applied to sales, either as a sales leader or as a sales representative?
Yeah, I think feedback's an interesting one, right? I mean, you've got to kind of obviously there's feedback that you can't sort of, it is 100% accurate and you take it on board and you move on, but I think it's also finding the things which work for you. I think there's a lot of, it kind of brings us to that the topic of sales advice, which we talked a little bit about before we went live. But there's so much advice out there these days, right? There's so much you can LinkedIn, books, videos, live TV, whatever, right? There's advice everywhere you turn. And I think it's about finding the advice which works for you. There are the sales basics, of course, which, everyone needs to educate themselves on. And that can be a formal situation where, you go through a formal education at your company, if you're lucky to have a company that supports you and trains you in those sort of basics. Or it could be on your own, through piecing things together with books or, individual videos, whatever. So you've got to find the thing that works for you. You've got to find the thing that works for your company as well. Just because it works at one company doesn't mean it's going to work at another company. So that's something to think about as well. I would say, don't be a cardboard cutout. Don't just follow what you think you should be. Find unique ways that work for you. That was really important for me because I didn't come from that formalized sales background. I'd done some sort of off-resume sales stuff, 100% commission things and so on, which was an education in itself, but it wasn't that formal education. I had to do that myself in my own time. And so I think the advantage of that while there was a lot of disadvantages, the advantage of that was really that, you find your own unique way of selling and you find what really works for you. And you have maybe, a different perspective that you can bring a customer that helps, provide a little bit more value than maybe if you've gone a different road.
So, last question from me. We are at a time of year where a lot of people in education are coming to the end of the school year and maybe facing transitions or considering transitions. Mm-hmm. For somebody that's in the education space right now and looking at transitioning into a sales role, how would you advise them? Where should they get started? What should they be doing?
It's a good question, and it is one of those environments today that I think people are potentially looking at different roles and different opportunities that might help them achieve their goals. And I think sales is a great job for that. That was really the kind of the reason that I moved into it, was to help achieve those goals. And I think first off, make sure that you do want to change career. First off, I don't want to tell people to get out of teaching. It's a great job, and like I said, if that's your passion, you should do it. For me, it wasn't necessarily my passion, and as I said, I really respected those teachers who were passionate, and so for me, I think I can only sort of talk to myself. There were a couple of things which were really important. One was that I had a mentor. I found a mentor. I was lucky to get one. He wasn't sort of in technology sales, but he had great advice and sort of helped me focus on the things which were really, really important, and still to this day is a mentor, 10 years later. So if you can find a mentor that can help you and push you, then I think that is a great first step. I read a lot. I read pretty much every sales book out there and made notes. I still have the books today, the notepads where I wrote down the most important notes of each one. And I'd say you don't need to read them all. I think I probably went overboard with that, but not that one is the same as the other, but you can pick and choose a couple and start with that. And then I think it's applying your sales skills, right? You as a teacher, you probably have a lot of natural ability to connect with people. So go out and connect with people in a way that makes them stop and think, hey, maybe this is someone I should, talk to a little bit more. And remember, like, part of that is offering value. So yeah, it's great to ask people for a coffee and so on. And a lot of people, that is kind of how I did it sometimes. But what are you also offering them? What do you have to help them in their jobs or them in their life? So I'd say those are the three main things I would say, or four if we add. Make sure that you want to do it, mentorship, studying, and connect with people.
Awesome. Ariel, this has been great. how can people learn more? Where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, this is awesome. And thanks, Rob, for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Love the conversation today. So you can reach me at Innerlogic, which is my company that I work with today. They are anyone in HR space, I think, should get in touch. We have an exciting technology, and we really, do help those, particularly in the sort of culture side of things, help their organizations. So directly through the Innerlogic website or at ari@innerlogic.com is my email.
Excellent. We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. Scan the QR code on screen or visit us at SalesTV.live/newsletter. This has been another edition of Sales TV Live. On behalf of myself and everyone at Sales TV, to our guests, to our audience, thank you all for being an active part in today's conversation.